There is a comforting fiction that has long sustained the Canadian imagination, a belief rooted more in sentiment than in the hard arithmetic of power, which assumes that the colossal neighbor to the south is not merely a trading partner, but a permanent benevolent guarantor of Canadian prosperity. For generations, Canadians have looked at the map and seen the longest, undefended border in the world, treating it as a monument to an inevitable and everlasting friendship. But history is rarely sentimental, and as we examine the trajectory of American politics today, specifically the return of a fiercely transactional nationalism under Donald Trump, we must confront a stark reality that Mark Carney has recently articulated with chilling clarity. The era of the automatic exemption is over. The assumption that Canada is family and therefore safe from the sharp elbows of American protectionism is a dangerous nostalgia. What we are witnessing and what Carney has identified is not merely a trade dispute or a renegotiation of tariffs. It is the potential dismantling of the economic ecosystem that has allowed Canada to punch above its weight. For nearly a century, when a figure as central to the global financial establishment as Mark Carney, a man who has steered the central banks of both Canada and Great Britain, signals that the global environment Canada once relied on has fundamentally changed, Canadians would be wise to listen. He is not a man prone to hyperbole. He is a creature of data, of risk assessment, and of institutional stability. So when he warns that long-standing assumptions about stability and partnership can no longer be taken for granted, he is effectively saying that the foundation of the Canadian house is cracking. Consider for a moment what it means when the United States, the gravitational center of Canada's economic universe, adopts what Carney calls a more transactional, pressure-based approach to global affairs. For decades, the integration of the North American economy was designed to be seamless. The auto worker in Ontario and the parts manufacturer in Michigan were part of a single synchronized organism. The flow of energy, timber, and capital was lubricated by a shared belief in the rule of law and mutual benefit. But Donald Trump represents a distinct break from the post-1945 consensus. He views trade not as a cooperative tide that lifts all boats, but as a zero-sum contest where, for one side to win, the other must emphatically lose. In this worldview, Canada's trade surplus with the United States is not a sign of a healthy partnership. It is treated as a theft, a grievance to be rectified with the blunt instrument of tariffs. Carney points out that every country connected to such a power must adapt, and Canada is no exception. The danger here is existential because Canada has allowed itself to become uniquely vulnerable. When you export the vast majority of your goods to a single customer, and that customer decides to rewrite the terms of the deal based on political whim rather than economic logic, you are not a partner, you are a hostage. This is the hidden story that gets lost in the daily noise of tweets and campaign rallies. We tend to focus on the personality of Donald Trump, his rhetoric, his unpredictability, but the deeper issue is the institutional shift he embodies. He has exposed the fragility of the international rules-based order upon which a middle power like Canada relies. Powerful nations do not need rules, they have power. It is the smaller nations, the trading nations, the Canada of the world that rely on rules to level the playing field. When the United States signals that it is willing to bypass the World Trade Organization, to leverage national security as a pretext for economic protectionism, and to treat allies as rivals, the rulebook is burned. Carney's message is that Canada is now operating in a vacuum. The global environment is shifting from one of multilateral cooperation to one of bilateral coercion, and yet the reaction from many in Ottawa and across the provinces has often been one of denial. I hope that if we simply keep our heads down, the storm will pass, or that the special relationship will save us. Carney is telling Canadians that hope is not a strategy. He argues that dependency is no longer a safe strategy. This is a profound indictment of the status quo. It suggests that the very structure of the Canadian economy built on easy access to the American market has become a liability. We must understand the mechanics of how this destruction could unfold. It does not necessarily require a formal declaration of trade war. The mere uncertainty, the threat of a 10% universal tariff, or the specific targeting of the automotive sector freezes investment. Capital is cowardly. It flees from uncertainty. If a business cannot know whether the border will remain open next year or whether a sudden executive order from the White House will render their supply chain illegal, they will not build that factory in Ontario. They will build it in Ohio or Tennessee to be inside the fortress walls. This is the silent erosion of Canada's future. It is the slow bleed of productivity and innovation south of the border, driven not by Canadian failure, but by American unpredictability. Carney frames this clearly. The world is shifting and we are seeing a move away from the stability we once took for granted. But his analysis goes deeper than just ringing the alarm bell. He is suggesting that the remedy, and indeed the only path to survival, requires a psychological break from the United States. He speaks of a Canada that is increasingly confident and ambitious, looking towards Asia, the European Union, and the Gulf. This sounds optimistic, perhaps even aspirational, but implicit in this pivot is a terrifying admission. The American century is ending for Canada. The good news Carney cites, that the Philippines, Thailand, and the Gulf states want to do more with Canada, is born of necessity. Canada must find new friends because the old friend has become unreliable. As we walk through this, Consider how this affects your community. If you work in manufacturing, in agriculture, in energy, your livelihood is likely tethered to that border. The powerful warning we are discussing today is not just about GDP statistics. It is about the viability of the Canadian standard of living. For generations, that standard of living has been subsidized by the efficiency of the North American market. If that market fractures, the cost of goods rises, the value of the dollar fluctuates, and the certainty of employment vanishes. Carney's argument is that Canada is adjusting deliberately rather than reacting emotionally. But we must ask if the adjustment is fast enough. The speed at which the Trump administration or any administration embracing this new economic nationalism can inflict damage is far greater than the speed at which Canada can build new ports to ship liquid natural gas to Germany or negotiate free trade agreements with Indonesia. We are in a race between political disruption and economic diversification. Carney notes that major investments are flowing in from places like the UAE, which has committed $7 billion to Canada. This is significant, but it is a drop in the bucket compared to the daily volume of trade that crosses the Detroit-Windsor Bridge. We are talking about replacing the circulatory system of the economy while the patient is still on the operating table. Furthermore, this situation reveals a crisis of identity. Canada has often defined itself in contrast to the United States, more orderly, more collective, more polite, while quietly enjoying the protection of the American security umbrella and the engine of the American consumer. If those benefits are withdrawn, what is left? Carney suggests a Canada that acts as a reliable partner to the rest of the world, offering stability and skilled labor in an unpredictable era. He is sketching a vision of Canada as a sanctuary of sanity in a world gone mad. But virtue alone does not pay the bills. The hard truth is that the network Carney describes expanding reach outward to reduce vulnerability is a project of decades, not election cycles, and the threat is immediate. The destruction we are contemplating is the unraveling of the social contract that relies on a wealthy trading economy to fund the healthcare, education, and social programs that Canadians cherish. Without the wealth generated by trade, the institutions of the state begin to starve. So when we talk about Trump's actions destroying Canada, we are not talking about military conquest. We are talking about the suffocation of the Canadian model through economic isolation. This is the precipice upon which the nation stands, and it is why Carney's intervention is so critical. He is trying to wake a slumbering country to the fact that the old maps no longer describe the territory we are navigating. What Carney has effectively done is shatter the polite silence that usually governs diplomatic discourse between allies. In the official language of statecraft, we are accustomed to hearing platitudes about shared history and interwoven economies. Carney, however, has stepped forward to articulate the quiet anxiety that keeps deputy ministers awake at night. The realization that the United States is no longer a champion of the open global order, but arguably its most potent disruptor. When he speaks of a global environment that has fundamentally changed, he is referring to the collapse of the consensus that free trade prevents conflict. We have moved from an era of integration to an era of fragmentation. The official event here is not just a speech, it is a declaration of independence from the psychological comfort of the past. Carney is defining the core controversy of our time for Canada. How to remain a sovereign, prosperous nation when your primary partner decides that your prosperity is a threat to their own. To understand the gravity of this, you must look at the institutional machinery that is now at risk. For decades, the North American economy functioned like a grand, intricate clockwork mechanism. Parts crossed the border multiple times before a final car rolled off the assembly line. This was made possible by institutions like the World Trade Organization and agreements like NAFTA, which provided a rulebook. If there was a dispute, you went to a tribunal, you argued the law, and you accepted the ruling. It was boring.